Good.
All right, Emily, you're good to go.
Wow, that was fast. Thanks, Kevin. Getting real good at this.
All right, I'm trying.
All right, we'll go ahead and do a screen share. Just so our YouTube watchers know this is coming.
All right, I'll be available if you need me. Just reach out.
Okay, thanks, Kevin. Yeah, I'll text you if I need anything. We should be good.
All right, no problem.
Hi, Emily.
Hi, Jamel. How are you?
I'm good. How are you doing?
Good.
Good. Trying a new setup here. I always feel like I'm in the dark, literally.
I will confess, a couple months back, I bought a ring light.
Yeah, I've thought about it.
I hesitated for so long. I was like, I'm not an influencer and a blogger and all that stuff.
Right.
But my lighting, I was dark or orange or pink, and I was always a weird color. And so I bought one, and just from Amazon, and it works.
Yeah, I think I'm gonna, the longer we stay in this mode, I think I'm gonna have to invest in one. When I'm home, when I'm working from home, the way my windows are, the lighting is fine. But when I come here to the office, for example, it's just obviously not right, in any way. So, and then, kind of, I'm looking at myself right now in the squares, and so like I'm looking off, and so I'm like,
I know, I'm looking at the squares and not at the camera.
Exactly.
I do the same thing.
Yeah. So anyway, at some point maybe I'll figure it all out.
Yeah, probably by the time we're back in the office is when we'll all figure it out.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, let's see who else we have. Just to let folks know, we are live, and as soon as we have everybody jumped on, I'll pull down the screen share here. I just want folks that are watching our YouTube to know that this is the meeting that's coming up. Hi, Pam.
Hello, how's everybody? Hi, Pam.
Hey, Dan.
Hey, Pam. Hi, Dan.
Deputy Secretary, are you there? I guess no, Deputy
I know not to speak.
Huh?
You know not to speak?
I know not to speak. No Deputy Secretary here. Just a former has-been.
Yeah.
A has-been.
Still my favorite Deputy Secretary, Holly.
It's always nice when you become a has-been, Holly, speaking from experience.
Yeah, I'm following in quite the footsteps here.
We used to say better to be a has-been than a never was. So.
Yeah.
How are you doing, Dan?
Doing great, thanks. Hope you
Dr. Pexton, can you hear us?
Yeah.
Hi.
How are you? Hey.
Good.
Hello.
Dr. Lane's here. Just to let folks know, we are live streaming on YouTube. As soon as we have everybody on, I'll pull the screen share off. I just wanted our YouTube watchers to know that this is the meeting that's coming up at 2.
While we're waiting, I did not see the minutes from the October meeting. Did I miss something?
Let me double check. If that is the case, that is my mistake.
Or maybe I'm just not in the right place.
They are linked. So in your board book,
in my board
there's
book,
a
okay.
link to them.
Okay.
And they're also at the bottom of that page too.
Of the board book or of your of the email that you sent?
Of the board book. So like
All right, I'll find it. I'll find it.
In your committee materials for today
Okay.
is where it's linked. And then obviously tomorrow's minutes are also linked in your November 19th meeting materials.
Yeah, I always tend to go to the public site. For
Those we have a request in to get those posted. So that's probably why you don't see those yet. It takes us, our webmaster has a large influx right now. So we're just a little bit behind on getting everything posted.
That's okay. Thank you. Look at those really quickly.
Looks like we are just waiting on Dr. Duran to join us, and then we'll get started. All right, Dr. Pexton, it is 2 o'clock, and I know we all like to be very prompt. So I'm going to stop screen share here so that everybody can see each other. And I'll go ahead and turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you. Hello, good afternoon. It's good to see everybody. I just want to thank you for joining us for a meeting of a special committee to review the standards of accreditation. Today's meeting is our last meeting of 2020, believe it or not. This has felt like about the longest year probably of all of our lives. But before we dive into the meeting, that being said, I do want to thank both our committee members, the BDOE staff, and the public for their engagement over the past 6 months. We've covered a lot of ground, and since our committee began back in June, and I do want to give a special thanks to Dr. Jamel Wilson for stepping in for me last month when I was a little under the weather, or a lot under the weather. At Newport News Shipbuilding, we call that good watch team backup. And so I'm grateful for that support from my committee team members. And so looking forward to the discussion today. So before I provide a brief synopsis of our presentations and work to date, have committee members had a chance to review the minutes from the October 14th, 2020 committee meeting? Looking for some universal nods there. Okay. All right, so with that, can I get a motion to approve or amend the minutes?
Motion to approve the minutes.
All right, thank you, Dr. Duran. Can I get a second?
Motion to second.
Thank you, Ms. Davis-Vaught. We will do roll call vote. Ms. Davis-Vaught,
Aye.
Dr. Duran,
Aye.
Dr. Wilson,
Aye.
and my vote is aye as well. So that motion passes. Thank you. Our committee's work began back in June. The committee's objective has always been to conduct a review of the newly implemented accreditation system to assess its anticipated positive, negative, and unintended outcomes of performance indicators. Some of the considerations included the board's SOQ and equity work, complexity of the system, and alignment with federal requirements. At the committee's June meeting, we received a staff presentation on the school accreditation process and the 2017 revisions to the standards of accreditation. The committee also held a work session to develop our work plan. If you guys remember my over-engineered shipyard plan, that we would try to help be our guiding path to get started for the coming months. And then at the July meeting, the committee continued its discussion on the development of that work plan and potential topic areas for review and consideration. In August, the committee met to receive two presentations, a comprehensive presentation from staff with an overview of the SOA in its entirety, where we walked through each part of the SOA and the 2017 revisions, a state accreditation data review that focused on data that reflected possible impacts of changes to the SOA, and an update on school quality actions and technical assistance as a result of those 2017 changes. Additionally, the committee received a presentation from the Education Commission of the states, the ECS, and that ECS team provided an overview of school accountability systems across the country, including examples of school quality indicators from a number of states. At our September meeting, staff provided a presentation on the federal accountability requirements under ESSA and Virginia's school accreditation system. This presentation allowed us to dive deeper into how Virginia meets the federal accountability requirements and to better understand the differences between our accreditation system and federal accountability. This meeting also allowed us to host a panel discussion, probably two of the most engaging opportunities we had as a committee. One panel discussion with superintendents and principals who shared their views on the positive, negative, and unintended consequences of the 2017 SOA revisions, and that included their insights into school accreditation and policies and practices that have changed in the field because of the revisions, which I think we all found very helpful to hear. And then our October meeting allowed the committee to learn more from the VDOE's internal staff work group on SOA implementation, and their presentation to the committee included background information on certain unintended consequences from the 2017 revisions and possible solutions for the committee to consider. Additionally, we hosted another stakeholder panel with representatives from the Virginia Education Association, the Virginia School Board Association, the Virginia PTA, Virginia ASCD, the Virginia School Counselors Association, and Dr. Alan Siebert, co-chair of the Accreditation Task Force. In early 2021, the committee will again hear from VDOE's internal work group on recommended language changes to the SOA, and will also receive an update on the work around a definition and data collection on students with limited or interrupted formal education and students with interrupted formal education. So that we know this is an area of particular interest for the committee. So for today's work session, what I would like us to do is, considering all the information that we've been privileged to really kind of come to understand and learn more about, I think this is a good time at the end of the year to kind of center up on our committee's work to date, to discuss and to hear from the committee members and myself what were some key themes that we heard throughout all the presentations and panel discussions, some areas where there are some gaps in information that we still would like to learn more about, some possible revision areas for consideration if we have some ideas to throw out at this point, and some next steps for the committee as we move into 2021. And additionally, this will be a good time for me as the committee chair just to really make sure and to hear from you if there are other areas in our work plan that need some revision, meaning changes to our focus, discussion, considerations, etc. This would be an appropriate time to discuss that. So this is really a working meeting, just really an opportunity to hear from each other. Hopefully you guys have pulled up all your notes from the past 5 months, and hopefully you can read them. I couldn't read some of them that I made myself, but this is just our time to center up and just kind of really see where we are as a committee. So with that, I'm going to open the floor to the committee chairs and of course to board members alike that are in attendance, just to see where we could start with some initial feedback and some initial thoughts on the things that we've learned in the past few months. And I will be taking copious notes.
So Dr. Pexton, I'll start with just a general observation of the, I guess, the value that I have found in hearing not only staff talk about how they have been focusing on the 2017 revision, you know, from its beginning, from its inception to now, and the potential solutions that they've provided to us. But more so hearing directly from our principals and our superintendents and our other professional organization partners has been incredibly enriching. And as I said in one of the meetings, I can't remember which one, I think we should be willing and excited to continue to hear from them as we think about potential changes or strategies for addressing what we would identify as unintended consequences of the SOA, and then thinking even more creatively perhaps about going forward. So generally considering where we all find ourselves across the Commonwealth with the impact of COVID, I think about, you know, while it is an episode, so to speak, the consequences, the impact will be felt for years to come. And so I just think ensuring that we stay close to folks in the field will be very important. Mr. Gecker and I had a similar conversation to this over the last several hours. And so I just want to bring that here to the group as something to enter into the conversation at the appropriate time and as we think about the SOA generally.
Thanks, Dr. Wilson. I think that's a very relevant comment. You know, I recall back when we first started this discussion back in June, there, you know, I don't know how to characterize, I don't know if I would characterize it as we were sensitive to COVID and the impact on this discussion and this review, but we also kind of wanted to keep it somewhat separate from what I recall, just to make sure we were really doing a concentrated review of the changes that were made. We're 6 months later now, and COVID is just as much, if not more, proven that, to your point, it's really going to have implications for a long time to come. So I think you're right that connection to the public is probably going to continue to become more and more important as time moves on. So thanks for that point.
I would just like to add to that and to say that what I really appreciated about the panels and what I think we need to continue to think about, one theme we heard was maintaining a level of consistency and accountability for making sure our students are successful. It was a drive and a desire of everyone, but making sure that we do it in a well-balanced way. And the question that we had asked Chair Pexton was really around what were the unintended consequences? What were the things that worked well from this? And I think one of the themes that stood out for me listening to several of the superintendents in particular was the attendance aspect and what could be looked at there in terms of making sure that we want students to be in attendance, but that was an area that they wanted us to consider about how we might better approach the SOAs around that topic. That was one theme for me. Certainly another theme for me was really thinking about our student achievement and overall performance. Are we really looking at growth in the way that we can be? Is it captured in the best way? We heard a lot of positive thanks from many of our panel members that they saw growth measures as being an aspect that was really valued in this, but also particularly, and this is the area that I have brought up, and when we think about our English learners, how are we capturing their growth and really making sure that what we're asking in terms of accountability and what we're looking at in terms of accreditation is really in alignment with that our students are making growth in our English learners. So that was a personal one for me, obviously, that I've talked about, but it's also one we did hear from a couple of principals who spoke, as well as a few of our administrators. So by and large, I would say, back to what Dr. Wilson said, is staying connected with those that are directly in the field, as we understand this is just the beginning and we don't of our first look at this, and making sure we have that balance. Our students and staff really being able to use this information in a way to improve instruction and address those inequities and look at those gap areas. And if not, where are ways that we can better help with that? And so I really appreciated listening and learning from the different perspectives and this conversation and our work plan moving forward. I hope that we will be addressing a couple of those areas that was brought up as a potential unintended consequence, if you will. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Drawn.
Dr. Paxton,
Yes.
I have enjoyed hearing from all of the people at the department who spoke with us and shared different perspectives across different states, especially for the thoughts of the non-academic indicators. I enjoyed hearing about what other states are doing in comparison to ours. And when we heard the state superintendents share their thoughts and the principals, something that I'm dealing with on myself as I'm thinking about, okay, non-academic standards, school accreditation, the current COVID crisis, equitable practices. And I keep going back in my thoughts and going back in our notes to think about what is it that we can do as a state to move forward to make sure that everything that we do, we have a pulse check on. So it all ties in together and it's all this big web that we're focusing on. And I'm very proud of what we're focusing on because I think it's a huge step forward. So I thank everyone at the department for being so very generous with their time and all of the superintendents. And I think it's very important for us to think about the accreditation and the non-academic indicators such as chronic absenteeism, but I would like to have a further conversation about how we can continue to keep a pulse check on school cultures and to make sure that all of our practices in place are actually having the impact that we would like for them to have as far as equity goes. So I'm still digesting all of this, and there are times that something comes across that I stay literally stuck on it and mull over and do some reading and whatnot. But I think it's something worth talking about as a culture piece and a culture measurement, just to make sure that we are doing what we need to do at the division level and at the school level too.
Thank you. And just for clarification, when you refer to school culture, that's in the same vein as school climate, correct? Yeah. Okay. So just make sure you weren't making a distinction. It sounds the same, but just because school climate was an area that I think that would be worthy of discussion as well. Thank you. Any other initial observations, areas that the board, any board members on the call heard? Many of you participated in the call and in several of the calls over the last couple of weeks, and I do want to consider any of that input if you have some.
Well, I'll just chime in to say I was pleased to hear and actually pleasantly surprised to hear from the superintendents that they actually felt like the change has felt like more of a movement to continuous quality improvement. And that, overall, I mean, obviously it's still in the early stages, but that overall they seem encouraged about the changes so far. I wasn't at all sure what to expect, even though they helped us shape the changes. There are a lot of moving pieces, and a lot of it is still up for grabs in many ways in terms of how it all plays out. But the early responses from them of this is much better for us than the old regimen, I was pleased to hear that.
Thank you, Ms. Holton. Any other feedback before I move on to my next discussion point?
So one thing to add to the list of something to dig deeper on. In the our last meeting, and I'm going to paraphrase horribly, so forgive me, but I believe Alan Siebert suggested that perhaps we are at a place where we stop thinking about fixing what is and starting over. Now, but I think it's worth at some point understanding more, because in that meeting we didn't have a lot of time and I didn't hear a lot of detail, but to consider at what point have we tinkered around the edges as much as we can, and will that tinkering yield the kind of results that we are hoping to achieve? And if we realize that it's not, then what is our readiness to then, begin thinking again about what a structure might look like? And so I just put that out there, something that may be worth conversation. It may be out of the purview of this group. It may be out of our window of time, but I am curious to hear more about what that might look, or to think about what that could look like.
Okay. Thank you. Any other thoughts or feedback from the board? I pride myself on being a good multitasker here. Okay. So in reviewing our work plan, which I'm happy to send out once I've completed all of these notes and updated and made it look nicer than what it does, just going back and really reviewing kind of where we started and some of our initial thoughts about what we thought we would want to learn more about. I'd like to hear from the board, on a scale of I feel good, I feel more informed versus I think I need more information. These were some of the additional key tasks or areas that we were wanting to hear more about, that if you feel like we put a check in that box based on the presentations that we received and the conversations that we had, then great. But if I mention something that you feel like maybe we need to add to the agenda in 2021, I'd like to hear from the board. So looking back at our notes, a couple of those things that I identified, there was a discussion early on about two particular indicators. One we've talked about a little bit, school climate, that did not, two indicators that did not make the cut in the initial 2017 SOA revisions. One was school climate, which obviously Ms. Davis-Vaught has already said, hey, I think we have some more work to do, discussions to have, considerations to make there. The other one was student discipline. And I put a note here, being disproportional to Black students. And I'm going to list them all rather than going one by one and asking. I'm just going to list them all. And if something resonates with you, please let me know. So student discipline was the other piece. We heard from Mr. Siebert from the COVID Accreditation Task Force. We had an item to say, hey, we'd like to hear from the task force. Do we feel like we need any concentrated discussion just with the COVID task force, in addition to what we had with Mr. Siebert? And maybe that goes back to Dr. Jamel's point. So that was another item that I identified that might be something we wanted to consider. Another item was looking at college career and civic readiness index and schools' ability to meet this criteria in the current environment. That was a note that I had here as well. I had a note here about the discussion around schools moving to competency-based, rather age-based approach. That was a note that I had. So I'll pause there just on those initial notes. And I'm going to go back to some, I think I have a few more, but I want to pause there just to see if that resonates with the board as things you feel like, because we've heard a lot of information. So maybe somebody picked up on something that I didn't.
So I think this idea of competency-based versus age-based, I think that for me, that is something that resonates as my wanting to know a bit more about, especially though it's not necessarily completely attached. Just thinking about where we are with waivers, with the way we are thinking about learning in this current academic year, accreditation. We're all having to rethink, this school year. And so is a focus toward competency-based, understanding that a bit more may help inform much of what we may find ourselves in a position of grappling with. So I would like to hear more about the competency-based. And I don't recall, Dr. Pexton, that we had a significant amount of time with that so far since July.
Okay.
Dr. Wilson, I'll echo that, because I think one of the good suggestions that was made from our panelists was to go back and look at some of the work of the SL Innovation Committee on that very issue there. And I don't think we've, as this committee, have not really dug deep into that. I don't know, maybe VDOE staff have done that as a result of that comment, but that I think would be another area for us to look closer at. So I want to echo what Dr. Wilson just said.
Okay.
So I've got one little one and one bigger one. My little one is, have we heard about, and so I've been in some of the meetings, but I may have come late or left early, so I may not have been with you the whole time. But have we talked about the college and career readiness indicator that is supposed to kick in soon? I mean, we've been collecting data on it, but it hasn't yet factored into accountability, if I'm correct. And how's that coming? How's work on that coming, and how is it going to work, and how are we doing rolling it out to the divisions? So I don't remember whether that's been a topic, but if not, it might be worth getting some review on that one, since it's the last of the indicators to kick in.
And we didn't.
That's
really...
my little. Oh, and my bigger one is just that. Yeah, that the almost fold. Can we think about how to fold in some of the lessons from the COVID moment, which hopefully will be a moment, a year from now. I'm optimistic with the latest vaccine news that we're going to be back to a more normal operation, but with a lot of consequences enduring in all kinds of ways. But maybe what are some of the lessons and opportunities of the COVID moment for that longer term look that Alan Siebert was suggesting we start to take? And what have we learned about parent engagement? What have we learned about breaking down the walls of the building via technology? What have we learned about personalized learning? There's some positive opportunity. What have we learned about maybe not tying more flexibility about the number of teaching hours versus preparation hours, or instruction hours other than classroom? More flexibility on the classroom hours kinds of requirements. That there may be some positive lessons from this ungodly experience that we could fold into a longer term conversation about what would it look like to start from scratch.
So I saw some nods from the board members on the first, what Ms. Holton clarified or represented as the smaller ask. And I'll be honest with you, I was scanning my notes trying to see if I recalled that conversation. If either one of the nods or Emily or someone could speak to that, that would be beneficial to start with her first question.
So going back in some of my notes, I don't think we've covered the college and career and civic readiness index as much as we can. I think there have been some mentions of it, but I don't think we've done a deep dive to give you all an update on where we are with that. It comes on board. Can't remember if it's next year or the year after. I believe it's 22 when it would come on board based on the 4-year cohort data. So we can certainly work on that from a staff perspective to bring you an update in early 2021.
Thank you, Emily.
Dr. Lane, we can't hear you. I see you're talking.
Sorry, I was muted twice on phone and screen, but to the latter part of Secretary Holton's question, I think one of the big things we've learned in COVID that the board should explore is, whether all the rules we have in place on time and space are relevant anymore in the future. I will say, on one hand, I think the minimum core instructional hours allowed us to ensure that core instruction moved forward. And then some of it's in the code, like the 990. But is 680 hours the right number? Is the notion that things have to happen in a certain amount of time correct? And then, are the class sizes and all of these things still relevant? That's in a lot of that is in the SOQ and the SOA, and so it might cross into certain thresholds. But I think that would be one of the biggest things from COVID that we've learned is that the structure of educating students in 45-minute blocks every day might no longer be a requirement from the state, and there might be other ways to open up flexibility so that can be done in multiple different ways. Now that's a rabbit hole you really haven't started to go down, but I think you heard a little bit of that from Dr. Kisner, and it's probably worth exploring again.
Dr. Lane, to your point, I would want to make sure that any deep dive or review or crystal balling we do also consider the equity gaps that we know we have, or the access gaps that already exist, and how changes may either mitigate or exacerbate the gaps that are right. So I would want to make sure that we hear as much as we can about all sides of that issue, kind of eyes wide open kind of approach.
And related to that, it might be time for standards around what the minimum expectation around virtual learning might look like, should we ever have to do this again in the future.
Well, in all of this, aren't we, at the end of the day, concerned most about what the outcomes are for the kids? And, frankly, the pandemic is, with everything essentially waived, is not providing really any, enough data to see what the outcomes are, how they've changed. To me, the whole purpose of the accreditation system was to ensure that the adults were doing what they were supposed to do for the kids, right? I mean, it was to put in place a system that said either you're doing it well or you're not doing it well. And, as we talk about these factors, and I know I'm not on the committee, but it would be helpful if we related the factors we're talking about, whether it be seat time or, quality of virtual, all these things that we're going to put in a new system, to how it impacts the educational achievement of our children. I understand school climate, for example, is important because if you have happy teachers, you have better educated, in theory, students, right? But to continue to draw the linkage between what it is we're measuring and student outcome, I think would be very helpful, not just for me, but for a lot of folks looking in on us.
To further your point, President Gecker, the school climate and the school culture is a broad measure of equity as far as the accessibility to education, to the learning, to the practices, to working with others, being able to, such as culturally responsive teaching. Is is it actually being delivered? Is it actually being encouraged in the classroom so that the child feels like they're a part of the greater picture? So also restorative practices and discipline strategies. So in order, at the grassroots level, in order for a child to succeed in a classroom, you've got to have all of those basic factors in place so that their mind is freed up in order to take on that new level of instruction. So that's in furtherance of that point.
So I did have a few additional items to just reconcile against our initial thoughts. But while we're on this topic, one additional point I was going to bring up as relative to this discussion and just to get the board's thoughts on where it fits was the information that we received, I believe it was last week, about school segregation and boundary lines in Virginia and the impact of those school boundaries on equity. And many board members may recall receiving that. What I thought was really telling in that article that I read, and I highlighted it, is that it said in this report, we're trying to think about the local level and the state level simultaneously in terms of how to make policy to support reducing segregation. Virginia is a really opportune place to do that because of its diversity, and it can and should be a model for other states to constructively address changing demographics to reduce inequality. So I bring that up just because I intended to, and also because of the nature of this discussion, but just wanted to get the board's initial thoughts from reading that, and also implications for this work.
I think that's a great topic to think about in the sort of longer term, and frankly, that we as the board we may have more authority in that than we have exercised in the past. Our constitutional authority to define divisions, even, or there's some language like that, and we wouldn't want to throw that around lightly, but to think about what authority we might have to impact, to hold divisions accountable for how boundary decisions influence outcomes. I think it's a great idea.
Thank you.
I mean, if it's okay, Dr. Pexton, this topic did come up on the legislative briefing. We did last week, sometime Thursday, I guess. And, the question was asked specifically of us, what could the board do more? And, frankly, our ability to set boundary lines in the Constitution or division lines is subject to criteria set by the Assembly. One of those criteria right now is that both the school division and the governing body of the jurisdiction where the school division is have to agree. And so effectively our power has been taken away, if you will, by that provision. In addition, something that we talked about at one of our meetings when we were actually meeting in person, which seems like a lifetime ago, was we are expected to do a review and report on the impact of the division lines on the achievement of the standards of quality. To the best of my knowledge, when the question was asked, and I think Steve Staples was still superintendent for part of this, we have never done it. I know, James, you and I have talked about it before. I think it would be very helpful if this topic moves forward, and I know it's a little bit off point for the accreditation committee, but that the board and the staff begin to undertake a review of current division lines and how they impact our efforts to achieve the standards of quality throughout the Commonwealth. We noted this if you recall, in the 2017 Comprehensive Work Plan document. The issue of increasing segregation is highlighted in there as an issue that we're looking to address. And so I'm happy to see it coming back again. I'm happy to see the report, providing the statistics to verify what we knew back then. But it would be good for us to move forward on this, I think, whether through this committee or otherwise.
Thank you, President Gecker.
Dr. Pexton, I certainly support that. I think that would be an exceptional body of work to undertake. Consider how challenging it's been to even get the requisite resources required to address the standards of quality. It would seem that something like this could afford an opportunity to go at that in a way that would be within our authority to do so. So I appreciate that point being articulated in that way.
Just an observation or a suggestion is thinking about where does that going down that review and consideration, is that part of what we would do here in this committee? Is that work for the broader board to undertake? So I just bring that back to, let's figure out where. We don't want to get sidetracked from the work that we're doing in this committee. If it is helpful, certainly, but if the conversation is more useful to be had at the board level rather than the committee level, I'll encourage us to think about kind of placement of the discussion.
Thanks for pointing that out. Yeah, from a chair standpoint, I feel like there's implications of that work to this committee. I don't know that it is directly the work of this committee. So, and what those implications are, I think would become more apparent as the board continue to work through that discussion. And so that would be my initial thought, but I do think it's a relevant discussion that we need to keep in our purview, and it sounds like there's consensus on that. But thank you for making that point, Dr. Wilson. Yeah. I do, from my perspective, unless there's some opposition, see that as a broader discussion.
Yeah, and I do think it does have implications for ultimately where this committee would land or recommend or inform the recommendations, but or how that how it fits. So I appreciate that.
Definitely. So if there's no more discussion on that topic, I had a couple more just reconciliations of our thoughts from before. If you feel like we've checked the box, then great. If you feel like it's something we still need to be considering or need to hear more about, this is the opportunity to indicate it. So my notes that we had indicated, and these are kind of a little bit cryptic notes, a little incomplete, but we had talked about growth measures not applying to the third grade yet. We had talked about why do we not have anything relative to teacher quality measures. And we had talked about how do we know the resource allocation component is effective. Those were the last three items that I highlighted for validation that the committee felt like we had sufficient information or information at all on. Initial thoughts.
Dr. Paxton, can you read that first one again? I just want to make sure I'm capturing it in my notes too.
Yep. Growth measures do not apply to third grade yet.
So I'd like to hear more about where we are generally with growth measures overall. Certainly third grade, but just in general growth measures and kind of progress that we've made to date. So I'll second that as something to circle back on.
I agree, Dr. Paxton. That's a good point.
Thank you. Any other thoughts there? Okay. So before I do a review kind of what I heard and captured as far as what additional information we would like to hear and learn about and kind of where we feel we are, I do want to ask, again, other than the position of I think we need to talk about that more, was there any definitive discuss or any definitive topic that relative to the work of our committee? And to that point, I do want to reread our objective. You know, our original charter objective was to conduct a review of the newly implemented accreditation system to assess anticipated positive, negative, and unintended outcomes of performance indicators, consider data available since implementation, as well as current state affairs, validate efficient progress towards original intended outcomes. We put a parenthesis say to review that comment, but basically we knew we wanted to really validate, opposite of the time that it's been in place and the information that was available, the effectiveness of the indicators, and provide system change recommendations if warranted. Are there any explicit topics that we feel we absolutely need to make a recommendation on? And maybe we don't know what that recommendation is yet. Maybe we know that, but is there anything that resonated with anyone that says, hey, we've, as a negative outcome or as an unintended outcome, other than, we've talked about attendance and some other things we want to look at more. Is there anything else explicit that stood out? And this may not be the time, it could come later, but I just want to make sure that we capture that if it is.
I'll just reiterate the notion of the dropout rate and the implications for students with limited experience formal education. SLIFE students.
I'm sorry, repeat that one more time. Notion.
The dropout rate and the dropout rate indicator and the implications around students with limited interrupted formal education, or SLIFE, S-L-I-F-E.
Right, which okay, thank you. And we will get some more additional information on that. And so we do have action on that in 2021. Thank you.
Dr. Pexton, the last time we met, I put in a request, and I know that we don't currently have that information, but I would really like to see a map and see where these children are located, which divisions, which districts, where are these children, what's the impact, and what is it that we can do as a board, our legacy, how can we help these children? What is it that we can do to make sure that when it's all said and done, that we get the results that we want for these children?
And to clarify, that's a map of the SLIFE and
SLIFE. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And that's, that's one of the challenges we have right now. We don't have a definition for these students, which means we don't collect the data, which means we cannot produce the map. But hopefully, we can provide you that update in what that definition may be and kind of the progress towards that, hopefully at our January meeting.
So are these terms that are being used in other states, other organizations, or are these just terms particular to our discussion about our needs in our state and our areas?
So just one aside there, Ms. Davis-Fott, is that the General Assembly did require us to create a definition that is coming forward to you, as Emily mentioned, in the near future. We're just about wrapped up with that. And then once we have a clear definition of it, then we'll put it into our student record collections, and then we can produce a map. Mm-hmm. Our definition is the one that we're going to be bringing to you, is pretty well aligned to what other states that have been a little further ahead are doing on this. We're obviously not bringing you policy recommendations yet in terms of how you might handle that with graduation rates or testing, but we just want to make sure you're clear on what the definition of a student that falls into this category is. Then we'll start collecting data on it, and in the meantime, as you go through the SOA, you'll use that definition should you agree with our definition of it, to make policy decisions about how those students will be impacted in a variety of factors. But the clarity around the definition is going to be essential. And we've wrapped up that work at the department level, and we'll be bringing that to you in the near future.
And ideally, we will be able to, as Dr. Lane mentioned, put it in the spring SRC if we, can get settled on that definition in early 2021.
Thank you. I appreciate that description.
Thank you. All right. Any other comments relative to my original question? Okay, so what I'd like to do is just kind of review what I've captured as far as where we feel we are as a committee, as far as what our priority focuses need to be moving forward into 2021. And so if I misrepresent or leave anything off, please interrupt me so I can correct it in the moment and then make sure we're good to go. And so we, you know, and I'm going by my notes here by who spoke, so it looked, from what I understood, we do want to dig a little deeper into, you know, the broader discussion around, is it time to stop just kind of fixing iteratively the system that's in place, or considering our current climate, do we really need to be looking at maybe of a wholesale change in our SOA approach? And we're curious to hear more about what others think about that, maybe from the public, maybe from the COVID task force committee, maybe other resources that the VDOE might be able to recommend. We'd like to hear more about competency versus age-based model, and considering the waivers and accreditations and having to rethink our whole approach to the school year. We'd like to dig a little bit more into that. We need to consider the equity gaps that already exist and how any changes or impacts that we make or that are maybe in place already could continue, if not now, later, have some perpetual impact on those equity gaps. From a school boundary standpoint, we determined that that is not the primary work of this committee, but it has implications for the work of this committee. And so we do feel like that's an area of discussion that needs to possibly happen in tandem with the board, or while at least in the time frame that this committee is doing its work, so that we can make sure our work is relevant to that. We'd like to hear more about where we are overall on growth measures, not just in particular grades. And we do feel like we need to take a closer look at the attendance aspect of our indicators and how it's impacting current state deployment of the 2017 SOAs. Piggybacking on my comment before about student achievement and growth, there was a comment about, are we really looking at that the right way? If we have additional discussions, or when we have additional discussions about growth measures, are we looking at it the right way? How are we capturing growth for for English language learners? And so we want some additional discussion and understanding there. We want to further our conversation on how we really are keeping a pulse check on school culture / school climate and the implications of that to the SOAs. We just talked about the life science students and the additional information that we're going to get from a definition standpoint, and then from a data standpoint down the road. We'll learn about that in likely in January or first of the year from the VDOE. It sounds like we would like to have an update just on how things are coming on the college and civic and career readiness indicator that's supposed to kick in soon. It appears the board would benefit just from just a refresher and really kind of understanding where that's at. And we want to think about how we can, this kind of maybe goes back to the big broader discussion about the SOAs. We want to think about how we could fold some of our lessons learned and opportunities as a result of COVID into intentionally into better SOA, or not, maybe not better, but more impactful SOA standards for the Commonwealth. And in that vein, we want to know, what have we learned about parent engagement, personalized learning, virtual learning, teaching versus preparation hours, and what room do we have there for some more flexibility? Dr. Lane expanded on that about looking at whether the rules we have in place on time and space are relevant in the future. You know, talking about the 680-hour rule, and do we have does that have to happen in a certain time that we have already predicated? We also would like to talk about maybe that it's time to consider what standards are in place for in the future around virtual learning. President Gecker pointed out that we actually, as a board, do have are expected of us to do a review of the impact of the boundary lines that we discussed earlier and how they may impact our standards of equality, that we had not done it yet. So that again, it goes more so to some activity that we should consider on the board that might impact the work of this committee. So that is what I've captured as far as centering up on the past 6 months of discussion. Is there anything that I've missed or anything that I've misrepresented in that assessment?
Dr. Paxton, you did an outstanding job overview of what we've talked about. I just want to clarify, and I think it was implied in what you were saying about the climate and culture piece.
Okay.
But I thought it'd be important just to double down a little bit. And maybe, I don't recall you said this, if you did, I apologize, really about the chronic absenteeism indicator itself as it relates to what we're looking at. I don't know if you said that, I didn't hear that part. So I just thought that was important to make sure. I think we heard that loud and clear from multiple participants in the panels, that I think it's something we should look deeper at. So.
Yeah, no, thanks for clarifying that. That was in my mind under the attendance aspect bullet, right. But you're right, I do want to call that out distinctly.
Thank you.
Keisha, I would just add, I think you had this, but the notion of tinkering changes versus wholesale changes, it could be a both and, could be where we end up. The more wholesale changes is going to be a longer term endeavor, but we may want to get, with feedback, we may want to get started on it sooner rather than later, at the same time that we make some smaller change recommendations for smaller changes.
Good point. Thank you. Any other suggestions? Emily, I saw you fervently writing and taking notes. I do plan on sharing my notes with you as soon as I can clean them up. So. All right. So I anticipated this meeting would be likely an hour. I know sometimes I can get long-winded, so I told Emily to schedule it for an hour and a half. But I do want to just give one last opportunity. You know, we still have, you know, likely, in my opinion, several months of discussion and observations and feedback to get from the public to really kind of come through this before we really get to some, if any, you know, specific recommendations. But again, I just wanted to use this as a centering moment. We've gotten so much information and wanted to do a data dump, wanted to hear what was in the minds of the other committee members and just really reconcile us against our original thoughts. And so just want to give one final opportunity for any additional thoughts or suggestions for our 2021 committee work.
The committee's going to be busy and staff's going to be busy.
Yep, I'm on page 3 of my notes.
Great leadership, Keisha. Thank you.
Great. Well, I appreciate, again, like I said in the beginning, I really do appreciate the contributions of the committee, the board members, the VDUOE staff in this important work. It's almost a little bit of a moving target with the environment that we're living in right now. But I'm grateful to be navigating this work with the folks on the call today. So I'd like to thank everyone for your robust input and discussions. Our next meeting will be January 27th in 2021. That just floors me to say that. But with that being said, I do want to wish everyone a wonderful holiday season. I'm going to ask and pray that everyone stays safe. And that you enjoy your families virtually, just like we are enjoying our family right now virtually, and that look forward to seeing you guys at the first of the year. Thank you very much. This concludes our meeting.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody. We'll convene for the board's business meeting tomorrow at 10.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.